Good morning. This is Claire Stevens from the Development Office here in Virginia Beach, Virginia, with Ann Wilson, Maclin, Gregory, class of 77. Also in the room is Sarah Hendricks, also from the Development Office. And we are here to do an oral history, part of the Living Legacy series, specifically part of the Women of Randolph-Macon College Oral History Project. Good morning, Ann Wilson.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for participating in this project. Just a few questions to get us started. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to high school?
I grew up in Petersburg, Virginia. Went to Petersburg High School. And my mother had gone to Randolph-Macon Women's College. When it came time to look at colleges, she said, I know you don't want to go to an all-girls college. Randolph-Macon is now accepting women. Why don't you look there?
So that's how you first heard about it. At that point, did you know anyone else who had gone to Randolph-Macon? I guess any men at that point?
I'd certainly known a number of young men. And looking back on it, I have been thinking about why I might have made the plunge to go to a school that was just accepting women. I think I really it didn't register on me that I would be one of the first, or the impact of what that might entail. I just loved it when I went there, and that sold me.
Tell us about your first trip to campus. What were your impressions of the campus or anyone that you met?
My first trip to campus was one of those volunteer admissions. Students would actually volunteer to put you up in the dorm. And I had pretty much decided at that point I was going to marry Baldwin. My best friend and I were going to go to one of the two schools and room together, and I'd pretty much decided on Mary Baldwin. I'd gone up there, spent a weekend with a friend, and had a really wonderful time, and but decided I'd gotten into Randolph-Macon, I would go and give it a shot, and I fell so in love with it I completely forgot about Mary Baldwin. I believe I spent the weekend with Claudia Brownlee, who had some Petersburg connections, and we had so much fun. So that was really my only real organized athletic experience.
Did you just do the basketball team, or was it football as well?
We did cheer for football, too. And that, of course, there are fewer football games, so I don't have memories as strongly of traveling with football, except for one night when we played Georgetown. And I will remember that is the coldest I've ever been in my entire life. Trying to cheer, the wind was bitter. But that was great fun because a lot of the students came up, too, for the game. So it was everywhere you looked, everywhere we went while we were there were Randolph-Macon students. Not many of them actually showed up for the game. It was too cold. But afterwards we did. The only other sports activity that I participated in was intramural softball. And one of my favorite college memories is there were male teams and there were female teams, and they did not play on the same league. But there was one co-ed team. I think they called themselves the Frodos, actually. One co-ed team that was playing us. And our league, we had named ourselves the Macon Outs. We all had matching T-shirts. And so, like I said, I was never very athletic. And when I grew up in my neighborhood, there were a lot of guys and a couple of girls, but mostly guys. And after dinner every night, when it was still light outside, we'd go out and play. Well, nobody would pick me for teams because I was terrible. And so my friends had worked with me really hard to get me to do a pretty good job on this softball team, and I had a little glove and my Macon Outs T-shirt. And one of the members on this softball team, on the co-ed team, was a neighbor from my growing up years, Remy Arnold. He was a year younger than I was. And the rule for the co-ed team was that the boys would have to bat left-handed. So I am in the right field with my little glove. And Remy Arnold, this is for the championship game. Remy Arnold steps up to bat left-handed, and nobody but I know from childhood life that Remy Arnold is left-handed. But there's nothing I can do about it at that point. But I know that he knows what a terrible athlete I am, and he hits that ball right to me. And the moment of triumph, I redeemed myself from the neighborhood. I caught that ball. And Remy Arnold was out for all his outsmarts, trying to outsmart us. And we did not win the championship. We did not even win the game, but I won so much that day. In terms of social life, though, we really relied tremendously on the fraternities. There were no sororities in those days. At the end of my freshman year, we did try to contact 3 sororities to see if they would have us, and the response at that point was that we did not have enough people to do it. So for our sophomore year, a lot of us who were really good friends got together and got rooms on the west side of the 3rd floor of what we called New Dorm, and we called 3rd floor west our sorority.
But did you have parties like sororities would have? That kind of thing?
We had, some parties were actually organized. Most of them were impromptu. Almost every night, what we could be seen doing is dancing to Motown hits in the hallway in our long flannel lawns nightgowns, just like a line. We had the moves, the words, everything. We loved it. We also constantly played spades. And that was, even nights before exams, we'd take a break to play spades. But we also, that was the year that, I take that back, it was my junior year. That would have been my junior year. Sorry. That was the year that Allison McCabe, now O'Brien, was the hall monitor or the hall advisor, and she was given a single room for her hall advisor duties, and Nancy Simpkins Brasher and I were the roommates. And what we did was we put all the beds in one room, and we set up the other bedroom as our party room. And Allison always jokes that she thinks she may have been the only hall advisor never invited back, because it's really hard to complain about the noise on the hall when the hall advisor is the one making it. But the parties that we had, some of them, like I said, were fairly impromptu. One night, I recall, the loudest party we ever had was we were playing all these Motown songs, and all the help from the cafeteria had heard us on their way home from dinner, and so they were in our room dancing too. So it was, the cafeteria help from the town and all the girls on our hall and whoever else just happened to wander by. We also, that same year, during March Madness week, speaking of those lawns nightgowns, we decided, Nancy Simpkins loved McDonald's, and we did not have a McDonald's. There was not Fast Food Row down there on US 1 yet, so the closest McDonald's was all the way in downtown Richmond on Broad Street. So one night we're sitting around watching March Madness games in our party room, and it was Allison McCabe, now O'Brien, and Nancy Simpkins, and me, and Reed O'Brien, and Eddie Webb, and I believe Kevin Wood. We decided that we were going to drive all the way to downtown Richmond to get Nancy Simpkins a Big Mac. But I was already sitting there in my lawn flannel nightgown, and everybody said, "Oh, nobody will care. You don't have to get out of the car. Just come on." So we all piled into, I believe, Eddie Webb's car, and we drove to downtown Richmond. And when we got to the McDonald's, it was a mob scene. It was scary. policemen were actually standing inside the McDonald's. I don't mean it was a fight, but I just mean they were like a throng of young people and everything. So I could not go inside the McDonald's because I had my nightgown on. And so Reed rummaged around in the trunk and handed me a tennis racket to use for protection as I sat there in the car with all these people around. And so finally I was so scared, one of them had to come back, I don't remember who, and sit with me in the car till they could get through the McDonald's. So that was, I guess, the first and last time that I went to McDonald's in my nightgown, although that did not stop us from going over to the student center to order cheeseburgers, and we would just stuff our nightgowns in our jeans and put our coats over it and just walk over there and order. And the old joke then too, I think what they would do is put one burger on and cook it in its entirety, and then after they served it to you, then they would take the order of the person behind you. And so constantly you'd be standing there for 45 minutes only to have them say, "We're closed," right when you got to the order, because they wouldn't do multiple orders at the same time.
Tell us a little bit more about your relationships. You've mentioned your close friends and some of your roommates, but do you have any other comments on your important relationships at school?
Yeah, I mean, the best friends I've ever had in my whole life are those girls. I mean, well, actually, there are some guys, too, that are still some of my favorite people in life. I did not meet my husband there, so I'm not talking about love relationships, although I did date on campus and, had a few cute boyfriends from those days. Although some of my friends did meet their lifelong mates there, I did not. But I would have to say that no matter how old I am, or how old I'm getting, the people that I still feel the strongest kinship with are a couple of girls that I grew up with as young children, and this really incredible nucleus of women that I met there. I'm still really close friends with Allison O'Brien, also with Nancy Simpkins, also with Dee Dee McMurrin-Mosteller. Mindy Dunn was a year younger than I was, but we were great friends then, and although I haven't kept in touch with her as much as I would like over the years, I still consider her so fondly. Also Georgia Esposito, who lived, she was a freshman when I was a junior, I think, and also Lynn Kramer, she was then. Jane Anderson Stakem is someone that have seen over the years. And then I really, I kind of had two groups that I aligned with. I started out with my freshman year spending most of my time with Betsy Lewis, now Betsy Lewis McNeil, and Cindy Weil Carmer. And by my sophomore year, I really, we were all overlapping friends, but I spent about 50% of my time with Cindy and Betsy, and 50% with Nancy and Allison. By my junior year, I had started actually living with Nancy and Allison, but still retained close friendships with Betsy and Cindy. And although they live a lot farther away from me now, I still keep in touch with them, but I don't see them all the time like I see Nancy and Allison.
Just quickly about social stuff, before we move on. You mentioned homecoming. Do you remember, can you say things about like homecoming or Hampton, Sydney, Camptown? The big, were there big social weekends?
They were.
What was it like?
Oh, well, there were tremendous social weekends, and it wasn't just the weekend, it was the whole week leading up to it. And so in those days, the first couple of years, every fraternity house had a band every night for the week. It eventually got so that they could only afford one or two bands a week. And so what the girls would do is say, okay, well, these are the houses that have the band this night. This is where we're going. These are the houses that. So no matter whether there was a game or a horse race or whatever, there were always the wonderful parties back at night. But those were the three big weekends, the Camptown, Hampton, Sydney, and Homecoming. And there was also a whole week for Rush, too. So those were some of the best weeks, too. And when I first got out of school, I lived in Ashland for a while. I worked in a savings and loan for a year, and then the second year I taught at Patrick Henry High School. And I remember that year, January, it snowed so many days that school was closed almost the whole month of January. And so all of us still lived nearby. We'd go back to campus and, go to the parties and stuff. In fact, I remember being fairly upset because the first year that I taught would have been the fall of 1978, and Patrick Henry High School faculty roster there was a huge overlap between the roster of my graduating class at Randolph-Macon College. There were a lot of us. I mean, we just moved a few blocks over. And so naturally we were back for everything. And I remember that a couple of assistant football coaches got called into the office one day because apparently they had been drinking beer while they were cracking some crabs at what is now, it was the campus deli, I don't know what it's called now, but it's right there on the railroad tracks. And somebody had told them that teachers were consuming alcohol. So they got yelled at for that. And then we all, a very crowded room full of us, got called into the principal's office as if we were children right before, I guess it would have been Camptown, but it was for a spring weekend. And the principal said, I don't want to hear about all you teachers over at these fraternity parties because the young students from our town go in these fraternity parties and we just don't want to hear about the teachers in there. And I actually recall speaking up and saying, actually, there's something wrong with that because this is our school and we went there and these 16-year-old kids don't need to be in a campus fraternity party. So I didn't listen to him. I went. I didn't get in trouble. And the next year I actually moved into Richmond because I just didn't think it was the high school principal's job to tell us that we couldn't come back to campus and continue living the social life we had not yet outgrown. And they never.
Switching gears a little bit, how did you decide your major and who was your advisor?
Deciding my major was decided when I was probably 4 years old. I've always loved reading and writing and literature. My mother had been an English teacher before I was born, and so all I've ever wanted to do is read and write, and that's what I did. Although in high school I had a very influential teacher with whom I still stay in touch, who inspired me greatly, and I was pretty sure that it would be English literature that I would fall in love with. And that was before I met Richie Watson and one American Lit class, and I knew that the rest of my life would be spent with American literature. And it is. I teach high school English, AP English. I also teach English at Old Dominion University. I went on and got a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at ODU. I didn't start till I was 43, but that's But Southern literature, it's my email, it's my license plate, it's what I read, what I write, and so I just love it. And so I guess my direction was tweaked a little bit when I got to Randolph-Macon. It became American literature for sure, but I've always known that's what I wanted.
And was Richie Watson your advisor?
He was.
Are there any, you mentioned that one specific class, are there any other classes either within your major or in other academic departments that stand out and are particularly memorable?
Yeah, well, I mean, American realism, I think, and because a lot of that has to do with Southern literature, that was my favorite class, bar none, and that, of course, was taught by Richie Watson. But also, I really enjoyed some classes with Dr. Tom Porter. I always loved history. I mean, what's the quote? History is only bad literature. So there's so much overlap. And at one point, I thought that I might even double major. I love American history also. And in those days, I guess what y'all call now J term or whatever, we called colloquy. And I took 2 of my colloquies. You could only take, I think, 2 per area. But the one I took with Dr. Porter was actually a combination history psychology class that had to do with the history of alienation, which was very, very interesting. Talking about different ways people are alienated in society, and it has a tremendous overlap in literature. I mean, if you analyze characters. And another was based on women, children, and the family in historical context, and I believe both of those were Porter colloquies, and they were fascinating. And I still find myself, even in my teaching today, will pull out of something that, although it may not have looked like I was paying attention in those days, I really was paying attention in the classes that I enjoyed. And just the perception of how our views of child development have changed since the Renaissance and everything. So all of those are things that I enjoyed a lot. I cannot ever tell you that I enjoyed a math class, but I can tell you that not being really scientifically gifted, I decided to do my lab sciences by taking astronomy and geology rather than having to confront a fetal pig with a scalpel. Having seen someone else's in our mini refrigerator overnight was just, okay, I'm not taking that. And although I was not a fabulous science student, I do have a couple of pretty great science class memories. One of them had to do with the astronomy professor, a man named Dr. Wade Temple, and he was a really wonderful guy. And one night he invited our entire class to, he and his wife and small children lived just outside of town, and they had a telescope. So they invited the whole class out for a cookout and to look at the stars away from the city lights with the telescope. And his toddlers were running around in their PJs, and, you know, it was just a really wonderful slice of home when you weren't at home. And it just broke my heart a few years after I graduated to learn that I think he had an aneurysm, but he passed away quite suddenly. Brain tumor, okay, yeah. But I just loved him. And he actually had some family relations that I was friends with growing up in Petersburg. So,
Barbara Shell.
Yes, that's exactly. Pam and Pat Shell were my friends. So, you know, my mother already knew he was there. Oh, you should try to take. Well, this is great. There were no computers. No computers. I mean, the only computer on campus was this huge computer that took up an entire room. And part of our astronomy final project was we had to determine the distance from one celestial body to another, and we had to use the computer to do it, and I was just hopeless and helpless, and I know I drove that poor man crazy. But you had to take these cards and punch holes in them in the right place to I don't remember how I did it. I didn't do very well in that class, so and then the geology class, I thought, what could be so hard about looking at rocks, right? Well, I was wrong, because all rocks really do look alike to me. But so I think that
Who taught that?
Skylar Miller, and he was a character. I mean, he was a neat old guy, but he was a very elderly gentleman even when I was in the class. And there were probably the largest college class I was ever in, graduate or undergraduate, was the seminar that went with his. We were scared to death of him because he was so intimidatingly intelligent. Of course, the rumor was that he had built his own harpsichord in his house and gave concerts, and that he had worked on the Manhattan Project, all of which are probably true. A brilliant man, but all we had to do was recognize rocks. And I think I had really set myself up to look like an idiot in there, because I was not very good at this. And so I recall sitting in his lecture hall one day, and he's talking about something, I don't know what, but he never called on me that I knew an answer or anything like that, until one day, for some reason, the discussion veered over into something about the bubonic plague. And he says, quite offhandedly, does anybody happen to recall the year of the last outbreak of the bubonic plague? Well, finally, something I knew. And if you ask how I knew that, well, I'm an English major. Samuel Pepys's diaries record it outside his window. I go 1666, and 99 faces turn and look at me, because here's the dumbest girl in science class, and she just answered the most obscure question that anybody could ever ask. And I thought, yes, it's just like catching that softball from Remy Arnold. My 2 moments of defining fame.
You've kind of gone into this a little bit, but do you have any other sort of specific stories about what you've done since graduation? I know that you stayed in Ashland and Richmond and have studied English, but
Yeah, what have I done? Let's see. Raised 2 children and helped raise a stepson who is getting ready to present us with our first grandchild this week. I do write. I have had a number of, although my graduate work is in fiction, I keep publishing poetry and creative nonfiction, but that's okay. I'm getting my name out there a little bit. I ride horses. I've spent 25 years not riding horses. Stopped when I was expecting my older daughter, and about 8 months ago went back to it with a vengeance. I had said that I was not ever going to do all those crazy jumping things again. I lied. And I'm now totally and utterly so obsessed with it that I don't even want to read and write. I just want to ride. I mean, I've certainly grown, but I don't know if I'm very much different. My friends joke me that I do have a memory for detail of people's names and places and events and stuff like that. So I think that I slip back and live in the past a lot, thinking about stuff I grew up with and the college days. And as a dyed-in-the-wool Southerner, I certainly prefer things the way they were. So I'm still really interested in history and things like that. So I don't know that there's anything in that respect that I haven't covered.
And how have you stayed in contact with the college since your graduation?
Well, I don't live that far away, so I have been to homecoming events and reunions, and 1 year, maybe 2 years since I've been gone, I've been on reunion planning committees and things like that. Also, we have a plaque in front of a tree, I guess it is, with a plaque with our nucleus of friends there in the plaza. So that commemorates our earliness there. And also because my stepson went there. I certainly was there a lot when he was there. It was really funny because I used to go to Old South at KA as a participant, and then when my stepson was there, I went as a mom. And I gotta tell you, the mom bus was a whole lot more fun. In our day, they actually had the parties right on campus, but they would, by the time my stepson was there, they would rent locations off campus to bus everybody. And so, what is it they say? You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So I've been there a fair amount. I'm never ceased to be. I'm always amazed when I get there at how much development. I mean, the student center. When I got there, we got our mail in the old gym, which was pre-basketball era. So we and then the what is the old gym was our new gym. Crazy. So things really have changed. And so what they've done and changed and added is just incredible to me. And I know they've remodeled and added a lot of dorms and stuff like that. So,
are there any sort of in closing stories that you had come to mind as you were thinking about our interview today that I haven't touched on with my questions that you'd like to share?
Oh my goodness, I've wandered off the track so many times. Maybe one. The Fountain Plaza. Oh my goodness, I cannot believe I didn't tell you about the annual Cockroach Festival. Has anyone told you about the annual Cockroach Festival? Oh dear. Well, in those days, I don't know who invented it, but there was what they called an annual cockroach races. And so what the boys started it, of course, and so what they would do is go out on the Frankie Brown Plaza and they would draw a big circle and they would place their entries, the largest ones they could find in the boiler rooms of Mary Branch or Thomas Branch or wherever, and they would put them there and in the circle, and then the first one to crawl over the line would win for its owner, and then it would be stomped on when it crossed the line. Well, this went on for the entire time that I was there, only each year it got more elaborate. It used to be that the winner, and they finally broke it down into multiple categories. And so there was best named, best decorated. One friend of mine's now husband, Tim Ashbridge, he had quite the eye for art, and so he could paint his very detailed and delicately with airplane paint and a tiny little brush. By the time the girls got involved, we were afraid to touch ours, so we had to hold ours with tweezers, and we got their legs all stuck and everything. But so by the time I was a junior, they had progressed from the category prizes being a six-pack of Heineken to that year they were actually Jefferson cups. The quote-unquote committee had chipped in and gotten these Jefferson cups. So that was the year that they were going to offer, for the first time, the Kafka Prize. And the Kafka Prize would be the student best dressed as a cockroach. So we decided to dress up Danielle DiGiulio, now Ashbridge, as the human cockroach. And so what we did, she had on black leotards and black tights, and for her wings, we took like a vinyl garment bag, gray, and attached it to her back. And then for her head, we took a pair of cheerleading underwear, you know, those black nylon things that go over your underwear, so when you jump, nobody can see your underwear. We put those on her head, and then in the leg holes, we affixed the legs. Pantyhose used to come in these containers that split open like eggs, so we put one in each leg hole as an eye. And then we tied a jump rope around her as a leash, and I led her with the jump rope. I believe we are in the yearbook that year on the plaza with Danielle dressed as the cockroach and me in a khaki skirt and a polo, but she did get the Jefferson Cup. Unfortunately, we probably would have rather had the Heineken in retrospect, but we did get the Jefferson Cup.
Do you still have it?
No, but Danielle might. She was the cockroach. I was just the handler. But we also in those days, Allison had a Volkswagen Beetle, the old kind. Obviously, it was new then, but it was a convertible, and in those days, it was great trouble to take the convertible top down. It wasn't a button that you pushed or anything, but if it was a lovely day, we would convince her that we would all chip in and we would all help to take the top down. So we would frequently go all the way down Route 1 to the celebrity room for the greasiest pizza ever. They had one room that had just like black velvet all over the walls. It was the Elvis room. My friend Cindy Weil used to joke that when she married John Carmer, she was going to have a reception in the Elvis room. She didn't. But on the way back one day from the celebrity room, here we are, all piled in Allison's car, and it's kind of windy, so Nancy Simpkins pulls her sweatshirt up over her head, a red sweatshirt, and starts making siren noises, pretending to be the police. I don't know, it had to be there. So when we get back to campus, we're not quite ready to stop this fun time that we've had. So we decide that we're going to pop this little beetle up on the sidewalk and drive it around the Fountain Plaza. So it seemed like a good idea at the time until we noticed that there are guide wires coming out of the poles there, and so you have to maneuver around them. So we went around a couple of times and then off the sidewalk and back to where we belonged. Well, count 15, 20 minutes and the phone rings. And it was actually, I'm trying to think who it was, and it may come to me. It might have been Charlie Gaskins. That seems to ring a bell. But there were some guys around the Fountain Plaza. They called up and pretended to be Dean Andrews and said that we had been seen zipping around the Fountain Plaza. Of course, we were not, nobody had seen us, but we were pretty scared there for a while that we had been seen. I'm sure none of those girls would appreciate my remembering that story. It was wholesome fun. What can I say? Every night somebody would put soap suds in that plaza, and you'd wake up and they were different colors. And they also, on one occasion I recall, Larry Delia, put lamprey eels in there. Apparently they used to go down by the North Anna and
collect it. They got paid for it.
Yeah. So one night they released a bunch of them in the Fountain Plaza. They didn't do so well in that water. But I do know that on hot summer days when we would lie out on what we called Moreland Beach, right out there, we would just all go step into the plaza, and once the security guard, an old guy named Ratliff in those days, walked by, and he said to us, "Girls, if you knew what the security guard's doing there at night, you would not be swimming in there by day." So that was the end of our swimming at the Fountain Plaza. Oh my! I better stop before I get too many people.
One more question. Yeah, because you have you have an incredible memory. Do you remember graduation? What was your graduation like?
Oh. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. We had our speaker was a woman named Harriet somebody who had gone to Randolph-Macon Women's College. Yes, with my mother. So my mother was all about seeing Harriet. I don't remember the speech at all. But what I do remember was sitting, we had a luncheon right out on the lawn, right outside the...
Where was the graduation?
I honestly, that I don't remember. I just remember the luncheon.
Oh, nothing. Because I think it's been something like 16 different places on campus. I mean, it's been all sorts of places.
I'm trying, I mean, I know my high school one was outside. Maybe in Duncan.
It may have been, or may have been in not in Moreland, in Blackwell.
Yes. No? One of those two. I seem to remember auditorium. But I remember that there was a luncheon outside. But we were seated, this is going to turn into a sad story. We were seated at the table with my friend Betsy Lewis and her family. And my father and mother obviously were there. And my parents were older. I was only child of older parents. And my father had, in those days, what we would now know has a name, which is Alzheimer's. But he started telling a story at the lunch table, and then he stopped in the middle of it. And it was the same old story he used to tell about a funny college story of his. And he stopped in the middle of it. And everybody is looking at him really expectantly. And he is unaware that he has begun to tell this story. And so that was the start of, my coming home from college and knowing that my life was changing in two really big ways. One, I needed to find a job. And secondly, that, I was going to see day to day, what my mother was starting to see with my father. So that stands, that and the ride home, it was really apparent that he wasn't what he had been. So, yep. I have pictures of graduation day so I know what I was wearing. I had the same haircut that I have now because I've had the same one since 5th grade.
Did you guys party beforehand? What was it like to leave your friends? Or did you know that you were staying in Ashland the next year?
I did not know for sure that I was staying in Ashland. Allison and Elisa Goglia had gotten an apartment off of Parham Road. I'm not sure whether they had actually found it then or not, but I knew that my best friends and I were all going to be fairly close by in Virginia. And at that time when I graduated, I was dating a guy who was going to be a senior the next year. So I knew that I would be back a lot. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to stay up there. Oh, I guess I did, because Nancy Simpkins and I don't think I had found a job yet, but Nancy Simpkins and I had decided that we were going to get an apartment in Ashland Town Square. And I think we had decided that at that point. And then at the last minute, she got into grad school at UVA and left me with a 2-bedroom apartment going, what am I going to do? And so for the whole first semester, I didn't have a roommate. So my parents were having to pay, actually between my banking salary and how they had to pay me more per year until I got a roommate than it had cost them to send me to college. It's like, good, you have an education now. We got to pay even more for you. So, but it ended up working out, and I did stay up there for like 2 years actually. I went home for the summer and then came back that fall. Ended up eventually at Patrick Henry High School.
I guess in closing, and this is a question Sarah often asks, is there any advice that you would give an incoming freshman at Randolph-Macon?
Yeah, the two things I would say is that I guess young people now are maybe better than this than I was, but my first semester grades were terrible. And I am not a terrible student. Those grades haunted me all the way up to the day I applied to graduate school. And I know that it is not because I wasn't capable of doing better, but because I budgeted my time poorly because I was having such a great time. And I also, high school had been very easy for me, and so I don't think that I had really learned how to study. So the maternal advice I would give an incoming freshman is really look at developing some study skills, trying to find out how to get study skills if you don't have them, and really budget your time. But the emotional part of me wants to say, love every minute of it, because you're going to have, it's not going to be the best time of your life. I mean, it might be, but it's going to be one of the best times in your life, and it has gone so fast. And I do remember this. I remember sitting in the sun on Moreland Beach right before I graduated, thinking to myself, enjoy your warm afternoons off now, because it'll be a long time before you have another one. And I flash forward to my older daughter, who graduated from Radford in 2009. The same time in her life, she called me and said, Mom, I just can't believe that in 5 weeks somebody is going to hand me a piece of paper and then I'm going to have to be an adult. And, I thought, wow, she's thinking the same things I was. So, love every minute of it while it's there. It's, if you're as lucky as I was and have your parents cover your education, it's the last day of your life that you will ever have total freedom at someone